There we go. Hi, everyone. It's on time, and I'm delighted today to welcome Helle Bank Jorgensen, who is an old friend of the Good Governance Academy since the beginning. And Helle's Competent Boards is a support member of ours. And today we're going to be talking about Helle's new book. And with her is in a fireside chat is our very own patron, Professor Mervyn King. With that, I know got so much to talk about today that I'm not going to spend time about the GGA and what we do. Please go and visit our website and join our community. It's absolutely free. So without any further ado, let me hand over to Helle. Thank you very much.
Well, first of all, thank you, Carolyn, and thank you, Mervyn, for having this fireside chat today. And I'm fantastic. I can see people coming in from all different places around the world. Why don't you put into your chat where in the world you're coming in from? So Mervyn and I have an idea who is on Dubai, Zimbabwe. Let's see, Botswana, Namibia. Amazing. And Mervyn, Professor Mervyn King, I should say, it's a true honor to be here with you and to have to talk about my new book, The Future Boardroom, How to Transform in Turbulent Times, with a person that have authored books, the King Code, all of these different things. So Mervyn, this is truly, I'm so grateful that you and I can do this now. And let's just, if I may start, Mervyn, in the book, I should show the book. This is how it looks like. And I just looked, and Mervyn King is probably the person that is referenced most in the book, with all wise words from just a few years, right, Mervyn, of experience. So, Mervyn, tell me a little bit, when you think about the past boardroom and the future boardroom, what evolution are you seeing?
Helle, first of all, congratulations on your book. I've had a quick read of it, and I must say, you do refer to me occasionally, and I thank you for that. But you've got what I believe is essential for modern governance, that it should be outcomes-based and not a mindless sort of tick box, rules-based situation. You've got to have the original intellectual thinking about what's in the best long-term interest of the health of the company. You've also got the concept that the company is an incapacitated person. And as such, the directors, and that's the governance architecture from the middle of the 19th century, become the heart, mind, and conscience of the company. And you refer to them as the stewards. It's interesting, compared with the word guardian. I always use the word guardian because steward is an administrative function, like a steward of something. Whereas a guardian is not only administrative, but makes decisions for an incapacitated human being. If he or she is appointed as the guardian, let's say for a 5-year-old child that has unfortunately become incapacitated through a motor car accident. So I prefer the word guardian, and the directors become the guardian of the company's assets and its business affairs. And the duties of a guardian to an incapacitated person are well known since the middle of the 19th century. And that's how eventually the duties of directors became good faith, loyalty to this incapacitated person, the company, care, skill, and diligence. And you've got that in your book. you've got the notion that we really need to think as directors on a company-centric basis, because if we make our business judgment calls in the best long-term interest of the health of the company, and it turns out to be correct, that's in the long-term best interest of all the stakeholders. So to be company-centric is a very inclusive concept because it brings the stakeholders together. We went through 100-odd years of the primacy of the shareholder, and unfortunately, we know the consequences. We know the consequences that planet Earth has become degraded, that it had adverse impacts on society. I remember as a senior counsel, King's Counsel, is known in the Commonwealth, appeared for a client that was charged with the crime with manslaughter because his workers in his factory used to clock them in, and to get the 8 hours out of them, they weren't allowed to leave the factory. So he locked all the doors, and there was a fire, and 3 employees were killed. That was the mindset of directors and owners in those days. And I'm going back 35, 40 years ago. Whereas today, I think the pandemic and other things have taught us that to make profits subsidized by society and the environment is certainly not sustainable. And that's exactly what happened in the 20th century. And at the turn into the 21st century, we really started realizing the earth had become degraded, that society had been abused. And we started thinking of the simple fact, notwithstanding President Trump, that business is at the junction of the economy, society, and the environment, and that fact will never change. So that it has an impact on those 3 pillars of sustainable development, and in turn, those 3 pillars have an impact on the enterprise value of the company. So all those things which you and I have discussed over the years, Helle, are in your book. They're there. And not expressed in the same language as I've spoken about, but the concepts are there. So I enjoyed it, and I think you've left them with a message. And it's interesting having an expert, an IT expert, Kerry, online, that the future boardroom is going to be technological driven. And I have, in the last few months, become fascinated by the fact that in most countries, I think if not in all countries, there's no regulation in regard to AI, whichever tool you use in research or whatever. But when you or I or anyone else turns to AI and AI research, let's say, on a topic, and you ask the question, detail as much as you can, it'll take you 25 to 30 minutes, but you get this sort of deep thinking coming back from AI. Now, as a director, you owe a duty to your incapacitated company to really interrogate what ChatGPT is saying to you, because otherwise you're not discharging your duty of original intellectual thinking in the best interests of the health of this incapacitated company. And really, when you ask for that answer and you pay your subscription, it's the law of contract that actually is applicable between AI and research. So I've done some work on this, and it's very interesting that this is me writing, that technology is a major enabler of corporate reporting, but it's somehow not associated with external reporting. It enables better decision-making in the boardroom. It's helping different departments such as human resource to contribute to the business. Technology is shifting the mindset of departments to become more integrated. That's true. Search issues include search culture and DEI avoidance. Ethics and values. There's transparency, responsibility, personal privacy, shared benefit, and human control undertaken by AI. So these are terms of the contract between the user and AI. And the longer term issues are, they ensure capability, common good and global concern, and quality assurance. And so each AI developed is researched and tested, and each AI system is tested to be safe and secure. So that's the contract you enter into. So there's a lot of obligation on AI when it answers your question. And it's going to be very interesting to see if people don't apply their minds and they just blindly follow AI, and it turns out to be detrimental to the long-term health of the company, whether AI is really responsible in damages for that. So the new boardroom, the boardroom of the future, is going to be technologically driven. And I earnestly believe it's a boardroom that's going to deal in an inclusive manner with the needs, interests, and expectations of the major stakeholder groupings, but applying its collective mind to always make decisions in the long-term best interest of the company, but making sure you've got all the facts. And for this, maybe you need technology. So just ask the very question of the issue that the board is considering to ChatGPT research, get an answer, but interrogate what they're telling you. So that's my thinking at the moment, and
That's
I want to write about it. But you've picked it up in your book that technology is critical. But
yeah.
I just wanted to emphasize that it's the law of contract actually takes over. Right.
And let's, I mean, you're so right. And so let's investigate this a little bit more. And I remember, Mervyn, I think you say also in the book that you cannot delegate. Well, you can delegate you kind of like some of the work, but you
can't
can't
abdicate responsibility.
Exactly. And there is a chapter in the book called Technology, Master or Servant, and where I start with kind of looking into the future and say, in the future, we will meet at the board table and everyone will just actually not talk to each other, but to the bot that's in the middle of the table that know everything and also can put, you know, the minutes together and everything else. And then the question is, who is actually making the decisions? And that really having the conversation around the boardroom table. And that can be hard when you kind of like know that the whole world's inside the ChatGPT or whatever AI you're using. If your mind is saying, that's something that's not right here. So Mervyn, can you share a little bit, because I know you also have tips and tricks on how do you ensure that people are actually not just looking at what they're getting out of the machine or being that Google or anything else, but actually understand the subject matter and understand it enough to really say yes or no to whatever that's discussed.
That a lot depends on the chair, of course, in that situation. And I've always employed the following as the chair of companies, that when there's something that's critical to the company and we need to make a business judgment call as a collective mind, I'll always ask one director, Helle, who I know is acute in this area, which we're going to discuss. And I would ask you to go into the matter. Have you read your board papers, Helle? Yes, I have. And you see the management has reported some 30 pages on this issue. I want you to go into it in greater detail, Helle, because when we come to this issue on the agenda, I'm going to ask you to start the discussion. So by that, I make the discussion more informed. And having discussed it for 45 minutes, I'll go around the board and say, I think the board is inclining to decision ABC. And I get nods all over the place. And I say, well, is the decision ABC? And they will say, yes, Chair. I will go to one director, let's say it's Kerry. And I will say, Kerry, why did you vote yes? Explain to me why. Now, if Kerry hasn't been a diligent director, which is one of your duties, hasn't carefully read that 30-page management report and hasn't understood it, hasn't understood your input, and hasn't followed the discussion for 45 minutes, and I say to you, Helle, please, Kerry, please explain in detail why you voted yes. Kerry could sit there with 2 rows of teeth. Very difficult. And boards start learning that I actually asked that question. And you sit there, and I find that boards that I was chairman of didn't, you find boards sometimes the debate goes on between 2 directors at the end of the table instead of through the chair. Well, when you get control of your boardroom, that doesn't happen. So that's important. But all the board, any board has to learn is having made a business judgment call that 4 years later turns out to be harmful to the company. And people suggest that the director should be sued for damages. Well, it's the company that sues through the board. So assuming the board says no, because you don't think you acted incorrectly, well, then there's a derivative action where the complainant can sue as if he or she is the company. And you and I as directors can rely on the business judgment rule. That's our remedy. And what does the business judgment rule say? Well, it came out of Delaware in the US. It says that, well, honest directors like Mervyn and Helle, they've got reputation as good directors. And it's completely inequitable that having honestly applied their minds and believed this was it's a rational business decision at that time, that they shouldn't be held liable. So the criteria for the business judgment rule to kick in is that we had no interest or conflict in the issue, that objectively speaking, we had all the facts to enable us to make the decision we did make. And thirdly, looking at it with the wisdom of hindsight, it was a rational business decision at that time in those circumstances, not the correct one, the rational. Did we have all the facts? Well, I can tell you now, in 4 years' time, when they look at it, it's certainly going to be looked at through technological eyes as well. So we had better, in making that decision today, ask ChatGPT research to give us an answer, because when in 4 years' time we get sued and we rely on the business judgment rule, we will say, you and I will say, and in addition, we went to ChatGPT research, and this is the answer we got. And we really interrogated the board, and then we came to this conclusion. Because we haven't done that, the question is going to be asked, did we really have all the facts before us? Because technology will even improve in 4 or 5 years' time more than it is now. So once there has been a case where the directors have relied on a business judgment rule, and it's a well-known matter with well-known people like the Royal Bank of Canada, let's say, and its directors, And it becomes known around the world, this issue that the business judgment rule was applied in the interest of the directors, and they had used technology today, and I'm talking now 4 years in time. So boards will learn that they have to apply technology, but have that original intellectual thinking and really interrogate the matter and the issues before them. But whether you and I had relied on all the facts available at the time is going to be looked at in the years ahead when there's harm to the company through technological eyes. So that's the board of the present for the future.
And I can't help thinking about, and you're right in terms of judgment call, and we have seen over the time that we are looking with our glasses of today on issues X number of years back. When I say to people, hey, it's not that long ago that you can deduct bribe, people go like, what? Or when we could smoke in the airplanes or other things, right? So we have that knowledge of today that we then using the judgment on what people did in the past. And you're so right also to look into the future. But we are in a situation right now where I think everyone would say that it's turbulent, that no one can look really around corners and see what happens with tariffs and with nature. And so how do we ensure we as directors have done our duty and gotten the information? And also, Mervyn, if you think about the systems are based on what information that people have been putting in over the years, and it's been trained on, I was going to say old data. And so the scenarios of looking into the future, how do we square that?
It's interesting, Helle, that at the moment we have many, for example, India has got its sustainability reporting standards. China's developing its own, but there are 3 institutions about sustainability reporting. It's the CSRD, the European Union. It's the ISSB under the IFRS. And it's GRI, of which I disclose I'm Chair Emeritus, and I was the Chair of GRI, an initiative we started and it became known as the Global Reporting Initiative. So we've got these 3 critical institutions, I think the 3 main institutions on sustainability reporting. But there is a compliance panic happening at the moment with limited liability companies around the world. Firstly, most of them have not done sustainability reports. Now, all of a sudden, I think within the next 2 years, it will be mandated right around the world. What standard is used is another question. But there is this panic amongst directors about how do we source this information? What are our data points? And so the board has to think completely differently, because you've got to include now this information. Let's say we're following the CSRD standards, which is double materiality, inside out and outside in. And we have to think how that is integrated with the financial. So integrated thinking has become a global force. I don't think there's many limited liability companies around the world that still thinks in silos. You have your human resource department, and the people don't even know those in the financial department, and so on and so on. Because we know operationally these things have actually been integrated for decades. And so integrated thinking is a Bastille that has been stormed. And no one, not even President Trump, will change that, I'm afraid. So you've got this integrated mindset, and it's inclusive thinking. And you make this point in your book as well, that really you've got to have inclusivity. Now, this doesn't mean that as a director you owe duties to stakeholders, because I think the mistake of certainly of the 20th century, was believing that we owed a duty to the shareholders. And we thought of them as the owners of the company, although they had none of the attributes of ownership. If a shareholder took a pen out of the company, it's a theft. And so having none of the attributes of ownership, we were quite incorrect in thinking that our duty was to increase profit, increase dividend, increase share price, and we were a good board, and we had a successful company. Well, so stakeholder capitalism, I think, is an unfortunate phrase, because it sounds as if you're trying to make decisions in the best interests of stakeholders, and really you've got to make best interest of the health of the company. And through that, you inform your stakeholders inclusively of everything, not just the shareholders, for example. So the board of the future is that, and you bring that out absolutely, that sustainability and inclusive thinking is critical for boards of the future.
And at the same time, and you mentioned it before, I mean, DEI, and as you're saying, we now have integrated thinking. I agree with you. Their companies do no longer operate in silos. And then again, from a global perspective, DEI looks very different in South Africa than it does in the US, than it does other places. And where at the moment now, some will say, well, that's illegal, one place, and it's you comply with another place around the world. So for companies with a board that not only in one country, but a global company, have to oversee all of that, what's your view? Is that simply saying, what's the values? How do we bring the value to of this company, so this company will sustain for the long run? Or how should they deal with things like that?
Well, when we talk about value creation, it has to be in a sustainable manner. It's no good creating value which is not sustainable, because that's not in the interest of society, and probably degrading the planet. I mean, if you think about it, during the 20th century, manufacturing a product, we would say, well, let's build our factory right on the River X, and we can discharge our waste directly into that river. So we're sitting now with 7 dead oceans in the sea where fish cannot live. And so that kind of thinking is completely yesterday's thinking. And any company that operates on that basis is not going to survive, certainly in the capital markets of the world, in trying to raise capital that have great difficulty. So the question really, Helle, that you're asking is, if you have a holdco listed in Canada, and you have 30 subsidiaries around the world, how do you get the culture of the company into those 30 subsidiaries around the world? Well, I believe that a group like that needs a marketing and a public relations exercise which goes right through the group. But one has to respect that each subsidiary is a person on its own, and the directors of that subsidiary in Belarus, let's say, has got to think carefully about making decisions in the best interest of that company. Although it's agreed with the holdco to market in a particular manner because it's beneficial to that company in Belarus. We don't have to spend money on advertising, etc., etc. And so you do that. But the directors have to think what's in the best interest of that company in Belarus. But nothing's wrong with adopting the marketing and public relations exercises of the holdco, which is part of the culture. In other words, how we do things around here when no one is watching us. And I always say, I think you've heard me say, Helle, that culture is an internal thing, that what the external parties, external stakeholders are seeing are the characteristics. So your culture is a Danish one, but your characteristics are something else. My culture is South African one, but my characteristics are something else. And Adrian Cadbury and I had many interesting discussions about this, that when making a business judgment call, the board should consider what the stakeholders see as the characteristics of that company or the group of companies, as you're referring to. Different from the culture, the characteristics are very important.
That is wise words. And it also goes to one of the things I'm also discussing in the book is the purpose. We're talking a lot about, well, what's the purpose of the business? But I mean, I think you and I also talked about this before. What's the purpose of the board? And what's the purpose of the individual board member? And I think often when I'm doing board assessments and other things that you don't necessarily all board directors have really thought through, why am I here? You filled in, the skills matrix and you did all of this, but why am I really sitting around this table? And what is really the purpose of us as the directors? Some see it like, oh, we're here for compliance. Others perhaps not so much anymore, so as a good dinner afterwards, but tell me what you think, Mervyn, in terms of how do we ensure that people actually serve around that boardroom table and serve the company?
Well, I always think that directors should go offline and ask themselves the question, how do we become a unified collective mind? And you have to deal with what is the purpose of this business. You have to deal with what are the value drivers? What's going to really drive this business? Like FedEx, its driver was reliability when it started. If we're not reliable in delivering parcels and documents, we'll have no business. So we have to ask ourselves when we do something, is this reliable? Will it be seen to be reliable? What are the key risk indicators? What are the key performance indicators? What culture do we really want to create? Yeah. And what have we created in this business so far? How do we do things around here when no one's watching us? Still like that American definition. And then we've got to ask that question. How are the external stakeholders seeing us? Do they see us as a responsible corporate citizen? If so, what are we doing that is right, and how do we protect that? So you go through that so that you actually get this unity of thinking when you go to make that collective mind decision. Because there'll be nothing worse than individual directors thinking of a different risk factor, and I'm thinking of another risk factor, for example, or a performance indicator, and someone else thinking of another performance indicator. And here again is the critical role of the chair to bring everybody back to that unified collective mind. So you really focus in on that issue, but on the collective thinking of how the board should be thinking.
And, again, I can't help thinking, go back in time. It was like I met you out on the golf course and I said, oh, Mervyn, do you want to come and sit on my board? And probably I would have said sit at that point. And now I argue, well, you do not sit, you serve. There is a role. How do you see we are recruiting the right board members in the future? How do we ensure we get that insight we need inside the boardroom table?
Sorry, Helle, 1 sec.
Sure.
Switch that inverter on for me. Sorry.
No worries.
I'll make sure my inverter's on because I think there's power failure coming.
That's a good one to ensure. So should I
carry on?
No, so I'm just thinking, how do we ensure we get the right board members, both of today and in the future, into the boardroom? And let's face it, it's getting more and more risky to serve around that boardroom table. So how do we, I will say training and I will say all of those other things, but it's also almost having a call for serving the company and ensuring that that company will be left in a better place when one leaves the company than when one's founded. But how, Mervyn, if you think back in times, how will you get those right people into the boardroom where people know each other and have good networks and want to, be friends as well? How do you square that?
Well, I'm old enough to remember what I call the gin and tonic brigade. They used to come to board meetings for their gin and tonic and actually slit open the envelope and take out the pack at the boardroom. Now, this is a fact. And it was seen as a sinecure that you got a board appointment. And you sort of sat back and got your board fees and didn't really participate in it. And usually it was family connections to a controlling shareholder that got this kind of appointment and became a member of the Gin and Tonic Brigade. Well, you cannot do that today, certainly not with social media around, certainly not with communication as it is today. So that we are being looked at differently. It's fascinating to me that I've chaired many AGMs, and there was a time when shareholder activism was the thing that a chair had to deal with. But shareholder activism has become like second level. It's now Generation Z who has bought a few shares, and they are asking questions dealing with social issues. They're asking questions about environmental issues.
I'm not sure if it's just me.
Yes, what happened was his power is switching over from the inverter to the from the mains to the power. But if you want to tell us a little bit more, Helle, about what you say in your book around this topic.
I'm happy to. And I think it is a question about ensuring that we have those right people around the boardroom table. And that's not only saying we need to have new people in, it is also ensuring that those around the boardroom table now have the insight, have the foresight. And I believe the global network to really understand what's happening and therefore can ask, as Professor Mervyn King is saying, all the right questions. And we are in a situation now where there's so much that's just hitting us from, all different, if that tariffs or is that nature or if that, what do we do in terms of circularity? What do we do in terms of other things? That's combined with also how do we as individual board members, our collective we, And it's not Mervyn King that says that, but I think it's Gopal Krishnan in the book that says sometimes it's going to be the competitive board members, right? Where it's kind of like, I need to show that I'm smarter than the one sitting next to me. So it's not us as a collective boardroom, but it's let's me show, and that's just waste of everyone's time and money, for the company's money as well, right? So we need to, in my mind, start having that transformation to the future boardroom, where we understand what is really not only the purpose of the business, but also the purpose of the board. What is it that I bring as a director? What does others bring as directors around the boardroom table? What are the real questions to ask? Of course, we need to have the compliance, but I think we need to talk a little bit about strategy, a little bit more about strategy before we start doing have we done this, and compliance. Of course we need to. But again, there is where probably AI can help us a lot in terms of that. That goes for the board portal, and what's included in that. So I think there is a lot of things we can do. I'm just also looking at the questions here, and
Yes, I was about to ask you. So
Helen, you
yes.
also have a lot of knowledge in all of this, and I should say to everyone, Carolyn is actually also quoted in the book.
Thank you, Helle.
Some very smart words.
So there is a question from Daniel here. Do you think obviously you're hosting all of these competent board events, you get all of these perspectives coming through. Do you think there is too much of a focus on compliance at the expense of the sustainability of the business? Is that a message that's coming through?
Definitely. You can't say, hey, we should not do the compliance, because of course you should. But that's not this. When you have those directors with such, not time, they're time poor. Let's just, how do we use the time best? What we really want is to have their collective minds and have them think about the issues that the executives, that the CEO is really bringing up. And so understand, well, where are we on compliance? Yes, of course, we need to tick mark that, but it should not take the advantages of the whole agenda. And now I can see Carolyn on the phone, probably with Mervyn. So thank you for the question. Yes, we are probably putting too much focus on compliance and not as much as we should on strategy. And then maybe, thank you, see a thumbs up. Let me go to what is it, Daniel here. Is there too much of oh, that was perhaps the one we just answered.
Yes, sorry, Helle. I was just on the phone to Prof. King. He's lost his internet. So here's one. How can boardrooms develop the capacity, that's what you're saying, we're time poor, to make informed decisions? And I mean, there's an example here about AI risks and opportunities without becoming AI experts themselves. But it could equally be informed decisions about sustainability related financial impacts without having to be a sustainability expert or an environmental or climate scientist. How do you in the boardroom develop the capacity or the competence to ask questions if you're not an expert?
Learn. Be curious. Ask the questions. And I think, again, it's Professor Mervyn King that says, this should not be a question about saying, oh, I'm not really sure I should ask this question. There are no stupid questions. If you don't understand it, say, sorry, I'm not sure I fully understand this. Can you explain this? So again, I'm also asked a lot, should we have a person representing different stakeholders? Should we have nature sitting around the table? Should we have AI? Should we have an expert on different things? Well, you're starting to get this really large board room if you should have people with all of this. And there is a risk that if, Carolyn, you are the AI expert, now there's an AI question, and I will just say, oh, Carolyn,
hand it over.
could you please, oh, that sounds smart. Okay, next, right? That's not why we're there. So I think we are going to have both current, but even more in the future, that first and foremost, all directors needs to, on a continuous basis, update their insight, update their knowledge, training, upskilling, but also simply being curious, asking the question, asking others, participate in different things. Then I think we are also in a situation where we will use more external help and saying, oh, we are discussing this. Can we get a little bit of insight on this? So you bring in the experts, but around the boardroom table, you have more generalists that understand, of course, the business, but are able to ask the questions. And I think that's Chad Holliday, who was the chair of Shell and Bank of America, that is very clear on that also in the book. And the same Dominic Barton, who is the chair of Rio Tinto, is also interviewed in the book, kind of like, you can have many different types of boards. And Mervyn King was saying that many times, it's also the role of the chair, having that wise chair, that ensuring we not only discuss all of the right things, but we also have the right insight to do it. And Michael Tresco, another person who was the chair of Unilever, is kind of saying his role as a chair is to ensure that there's no unanswered questions around the boardroom table. Because there's nothing worse that you're in a situation where a director is sitting there like everyone else are looking like they're nodding. And I think Professor Mervyn King was saying that before. And then, well, if everyone else is nodding and saying yes, then I have this question sitting in the back of my mind and I have not answered it or asked it, right? That should not happen. But of course, we're also in a situation where we don't have all the time in the world. So we need to have that chair that understand how do we get the information from all the different directors? How do we get to consensus or not consensus? Good to see you again.
Prof. King is back. And I think, Helle, you've answered that other question around the need for AI-specific roles or committees, similar to audit or risk committees. As you're saying, if we were to do that with every single aspect of all the critical business issues that we're starting to face these days, you would have so many committees. But anyway, so let me leave the conversation over to you, Prof. King, and to Helle.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, just on the question we had before, and in one of the chapters, and I'm just looking it up right now, I have like 10 C's, and the chapter is called Competence, Curiosity, Courage, and Compassion. And I think that some of these qualities that we need also to see in board members, and this really being curious and having the critical thinking is one of the C's as well, is important. And the collaboration that also you talked about, Mervyn. So we answered a few questions while you were, I was almost going to say, not with us.
I was in the ether.
Yes. So another one of these C's that I have here is conscience, compassion, courage. And I'm not sure we're seeing as much as some would want to see of that at the moment, because everyone is focused on how do I survive the next quarter and the next potential tariff. How do we ensure that you keep on having that courage in the boardroom and the compassion?
Well, I think one of the bad corporate governance sins is a board member or the whole board thinking, well, I'm not going to make a decision on this issue. I'm going to abstain because it's so risky. I'm not sure. You can actually bring an economy to a standstill because the board is there to take risk for reward. That's why the trustees of your pension fund don't take your money and just invest it in a money market. They invest in equities and invest where there's risk, but a greater return because you've got to watch inflation, etc. So it's terrible when people abstain. And as a chair, you've got to try and get that unanimity to make a business judgment call. So it takes courage to having built up a reputation and then accept a director's appointment where you could be party to having made, as honestly as you're acting, the wrong business judgment call, which causes harm, and you could be sued. And hence you've got directors' officers, insurance cover, and you've got the business judgment rule and things we've been talking about. So courage is a very important part of the director's culture, characteristics. And collaboration is critical. It's very interesting to me that SDG 17 is about collaboration. Because without collaboration, you're not going to achieve those SDG 16 issues. You're not going to. And I think we saw that during the Corona era, the COVID era. I coined the word coronanomics, that to me, it was a board had to act with compassion to realize that there'd be such an adverse impact on your stakeholders. But the stakeholders had to understand that there'd been an adverse impact on the company itself. So you needed a lot of compassion to survive, to remain intact, so you could come out of that nightmare and start thriving again. But if the board doesn't have that compassion to really say to stakeholders, well, I realize you've suffered hardships, but I understand I've also suffered hardships. So really we need to try and, because the important thing is to survive, because if during the pandemic we'd sold assets and we'd lost human capital, I mean, when we got rid of the pandemic, imagine trying to put that together. Well, very difficult to get that human capital back and buy new machinery, plant machinery, for example, whatever it is. And you would have, during that period, have got very little for your hard assets. So one needed compassion, collaboration, courage during that period. And that shows that these are qualities of a director, and the pandemic showed it.
Yeah, and I think up to that point that it might be that cash is king, not your name, but care is queen, right? That you need to care, and if you don't care for your suppliers, your employees, customers, why should they care for you after the fact? I can see a question coming in also from Joyce Cacho, who is also actually in the book or quoted in the book. And Joyce, you say here, learn. How can AI LLMs to ensure their biases do not put your board and company cultures at risk? And I think that's a very important question. And especially we're living in a world where there are a lot of trolls that can put a lot of noise out there. And I've heard from, I think it was during the World Economic Forum with Edelman saying, many young people, they read the first line of an article, then they go and read all the comments before they decide if they're going to read the article. And I argued, well, what if it's trolls that have put in a lot of comments that either make me read it or not read it? So there's a lot of biases out there. How do we, Mervyn, how do we get around that? And it gets to the courage, but it also gets to the values and the compassion. So how do we deal with all of those biases that's out there?
This is where original intellectual thinking really comes to play. That you can see what these trolls are telling you and whatever information is coming in. So you take account of it, but you don't rely on it completely. And that's why, again, I use the word interrogation. I mean, a board has to interrogate these things. I think of a classic case where I was involved when I was still practicing law, where a committee was appointed to buy a new head office for the company. And they bought a building, and the board should never have given them the right to conclude. I mean, it should have been find it and then come back to the board. But anyway, the board gave them the right, so the company was bound. And the building was such that you couldn't lay optic fiber in the building. And yet the company was now settled with this building. And the committee, of course, had acted irresponsibly. But the directors were liable. So here's a good case of you can delegate, but you cannot abdicate your responsibility. And therefore, you need to interrogate that very carefully and make sure you've made an original intellectual decision collectively with this unified collective mind we've spoken about already. So one has to be very careful with that situation, that you delegate, but make sure you interrogate the findings of your committee and then make a decision in the long-term best interest of the company. But you can't just blindly accept what and you should never give your committee the decision-making ability that they bind the company. Then you've abdicated your responsibility. And it's stupid because although you've abdicated your responsibility, you are still going to be liable.
Exactly. And I think you know that I'm talking to some insurance companies at the moment about also the D&O insurance, because the risk that insurance companies are taking on, or you can also say the directors that have not read the small tiny letters in the policies. I know we are actually.
I was a chair of an insurance company, so I understand. The difficulty and the problems of insurance today is the reinsurance. Because once you insure, especially with the uncertainties and unpredictability of what's happening in the economies today, you have to reinsure your risk. And now to get a reinsurance for another insurance company is perplexity on perplexity. And you're dealing with knowledgeable people in the question of risk. And so I'm very pleased I'm no longer a chairman or director of an insurance company today, because just imagine the question of insuring homes in Los Angeles today. I mean, if I'm acting for a reinsurance company, well, maybe I would decide not to reinsure it at all. So I think insurance companies have huge risk management issues today. And it's going to be tested with the reinsurance of things like residences in Los Angeles.
Yeah, I think you're right. And many there will find that what they had as a retirement plan, as a house, is now a golden prison, or what we otherwise call stranded asset. But that kind of like have the impact. And now I can see Carolyn is going to tell me, now we need to stop, Mervyn. We need to do another session about D&O insurance. And Caroline, will you talk about Thursday and the group?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Helle. Thank you so much for your time with us. Thank you, Prof. King. It's always very interesting to hear, and especially, Helle, when you referred to the book and all the quotes. I did put the link to your book in the chat function, but if anyone does want to have a look at that and review the book, please, the link is on the event page. We will be posting the recording and the Q&A summary, as well as a summary, podcast style summary. So please go and have a look at the event page. Our colloquium, our 13th colloquium, is on Thursday. So please do join us. Have a look on our events page. We're going to be talking about regulation and deregulation, and the sensible regulation and deregulation, and what that means, especially for leaders. And Helle, you mentioned that as well, about the impacts of regulations on boards and leaders generally. So thank you very much, everybody. I hope to see you there on Thursday. Please go and check out Helle's book, and we're looking forward to another very exciting episode on Thursday. So hope to see you there. I hope to see you all there. Great. Thank you, Helle. Thank you, Prof. King.
Thank you, Helle.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thanks. Bye,
See you.
everyone.
Thanks so much. Have a good evening.
Thank you.